All right, hold on. I just need one more minute.
Apparently, Discord can now allow you to link your PlayStation accounts.
Yep. All right, so one thing before I do start, I'll be stopping periodically for questions. So try to hold those until I stop. So, welcome to the first custom maps workshop. Today I'll be covering a couple basics, some slightly more advanced topics too, for modifying custom maps on PS2. Before we start, a couple things to kind of some disclaimers. So this process is not user-friendly. It's extremely easy to break a map, and it's also extremely easy to corrupt your ISO. So keep those in mind. There's not any user-friendly options for modifying PS2 maps currently. The closest one is the wrench level editor that Chaotic's been working on. But that comes with its own set of challenges for getting things to work right, and it's still not perfect. So what we're going to be focusing on today is a command line tool that Dan mostly wrote. I've added some stuff to it that utilizes the WAD tool as part of wrench. So it is using pieces of it, but it will hopefully in the future we'll have a more user-friendly version of this. So before you get started too, you will need a Hex Editor. The one I use is 010. It's not free, but it has a lot of features that I like. So I use it pretty regularly, but you can use things like HXD or some of the other ones. They just may not have everything this one does. So first thing you want to do with UYA as well is you want to have an ISO on your computer. Then you'll also want to label it something so that you know it's a clean ISO. And then you also want to make another copy of it, and that'll be the copy that you actually edit. So when this thing patches the ISO, it actually will clean the ISO as it goes. Because like I mentioned before, it's very easy to corrupt the ISO or break it. So you want a way to be able to like have a clean install when you're modifying these. So I've got one called UYA-clean. As you can tell, it's very old. I haven't touched it. It's from 2011. But the one that I do modify, I have it in this maps folder. It's called UYA Sandbox. This is the one that that I cram all the maps into while I'm testing. So, any questions before I get into the program itself? No.
Mm-hmm.
No,
What's
you
going
can't.
on?
You can't corrupt your disk itself because you can't write to it. So that's safe. I mean, it can freeze your PS2 if the map is not right. But other than that,
Up your arsenal.
it's fine.
This sounds like a vibe of doing custom maps or something.
Yeah, this is a workshop for custom maps, guys. So
Okay.
yeah, save questions for when I open it up after certain sections.
Cool. Okay.
Any others before I continue?
Yes, I'd just like to say that you're amazing.
Love you, Badger.
Oh, thanks.
I love you, man.
Thanks, guys.
Keep up the good work, homie.
All right. So we've covered setting up the ISO and everything. Now let's get into the the program. So at a certain point, we'll have links and stuff to the program for you to use. But for this case, I'm just having it's a pre-built version. It's called DL Level Packer. Obviously, it started with Deadlocked, but I've added some UYA support to it since then.
Yeah.
But the way that I'm referencing it is you can shift right click in Windows, and if you've got admin permissions, you can open up a PowerShell window. And so there's a bunch of commands that you can use. Some of them are like pre-filled in. So you can see I use a lot of them. But ideally what you want to do is you want to start with the folder. So we'll type /DLP, and then it should be dl.level.exe. Obviously I haven't specified a command, so it's not very happy. So it will give you a list of current commands that are available. We won't cover all of these in the workshop in this session, but I can cover some in a later session. So the first thing you want to do is extract a map, figure out which map you want. I don't have a list with me currently, but at some point we'll have a list of which map is what in UYA. But the first one we want is the extract command. So you can go up to and select the exe, and then we want to do extract. And then if you do extract and you don't have all the arguments, it'll tell you that things are missing. So first of all, we want to figure out the ID we want, and then the folder that we want the extracted map to go to. So we'll do extract, and then -I will be your ISO. So for this one, it would be UYA sandbox.iso, and then our level ID, which would be ID, and then we'll do level 3, which is Marcadia, and then our output folder we want, which would be -O, is just going to be level 3. As you can see, it failed because I have not written these commands by hand in a while. So failed because it couldn't find it. I believe that is because I didn't specify the ISO itself. We've tried to find which one did I use? Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Well, obviously we'll probably have to edit this workshop. I know I'm typing wrong. I just have to.
Gotta love live demos, man.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, so let's extract this, and actually, yeah, we actually want to use UYA clean as the map, because -1 means it can't find the file. There we go. So what it's doing is it's going up a folder, finding my clean ISO, and extracting the map. So we have level 3 here, and what it outputs is a bunch of files from the ISO. We won't cover all of these today because some of them aren't even used, but the main one we care about is level 3.0.wad. That is the main the main one for the level. And then we also have the level 3.2.wad, which is the gameplay file, and we'll get to that later. All right, So once you've actually extracted a map, you'll want to unpack it. So let's go ahead and do that. So our next command will be unpack. So just like before, you type unpack. There's a couple of commands that it expects. It wants the input folder, or the input file, and then the output folder. So since we're in the root, we'll do -I, which is level 3, and then our output, well, it's level 3 / level 3.0.wad, and then our output will be level 3. So what happens is when you do that, it'll unpack different parts of the map. There's segments and then there's wads. So the map has unpacked data in it already, but it also has packed data, and that's represented by the term wad. So now that you've got everything unpacked, there is a special thing you have to do for story mode maps of UYA. And this is just because we haven't figured out everything with how the format's different. But what you want to do is you'll want to open this 08.bin file. This is referred as the header file. This has the headers for all of the assets in the map. And the index that you want to null out is going to be 78. So we'll go down here to 70 in hex and then over by 2. This is 78. And we just replace that with zeros. So what happens is when this data is there, it'll confuse the extractor and it won't extract things correctly. Any questions on that before we move on to the next command?
No.
Sweet. Okay, so we've extracted a map, we've unpacked it. Now what we want to do is unpack the assets. So this is going to be all the models and things for that. So just scroll up and then we'll do unpack -assets. And again, we have an input and an output that we want. So we have the input folder. So it's going to be level 3. And then our output is going to be, usually what I do is I create a assets folder inside of this, and that's where everything will be stored as far as those models go. So we'll do level 3 / assets. Okay. Now that that's done, it created a folder in here called assets, and then we have a bunch of stuff in here that I will cover. I'll cover more in depth later, but maps consist of some pretty high level things. So you have MOBIs, which are all of the things that get spawned in the map, like your health crates, your vehicles, ammo crates, your nodes. All of that is considered a MOBI. You have shrubs, which are the little tiny pebbles and rocks that are on the ground, as well as like bushes and things like grass. Terrain, that's self-explanatory. That is the major part of the map. This textures folder isn't used because that's remnants of earlier. And then ties are your larger objects. So that's going to be things like your buildings, larger rocks, walls, so even some of the bridges and floor. Those are all ties. You've got collision. Collision's what you walk on, what you run into. This is what tells it like where all the walls are. It's all baked into a single file, which makes this kind of hard. And then some of these are re-exports. So you've got header.bin, which is just a mirror copy of this 08.bin. Occlusion, that is what controls what's visible and what's not. Like let's say you go behind a wall, it'll de-render a bunch of stuff behind it to preserve resources so the PS2 doesn't lag. Sky.bin, that's your skybox. It's pretty much all self-contained. You got this sprite folders, that's some of the 2D graphics, your particles, things like that. Some of these we won't be editing, by the way. And then there's a couple of unknown files. Like I think 6C and 7.0, those are the sound indices. But we'll cover those later. So those are the main file types for your assets. Any questions on those? Sweet. All right, let's move on to the next one. So the next big piece of this is the gameplay. So just like before, hey Panda. So just like before, when you unpack assets, you'll want to unpack the gameplay. So let's go back, do unpack gameplay, figure out what we need. So we need the input, the ID, the output, and then for this one, we'll actually need a version as well. So let's do unpack gameplay. Our input will be the file, I believe. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the file. Or no, because the version 3 figures out which one it is. So we do level 3. We need ID, which is 3. It uses that for a couple other things. Our output is going to be level 3/gameplay. And then our version is going to be 3 as well, 3 for UYA. Because it defaults to 4, which is deadlocked, and it handles things differently. And deadlocks will do that. Now it's going to unpack everything in the gameplay file. As you can see, there is a lot. And so with the gameplay file, I'll be covering more of this in a minute. But as you see, there's a ton of stuff in here. This is where we can get into a lot of the cool things with editing the map. So we've unpacked everything. Now let's go ahead and let's repack it. So to do that, we're basically just going to do the inverse of what we just did. So instead of unpack gameplay, we're going to do pack gameplay. And then we need the input folder, which is going to be level 3/gameplay. And then our output file, which is going to be level 3/ we'll do level 3.2. Just call this test.wad. And then our version will be 3. So what this is doing is take all of our loose files. It's going to pack it back into the level 3 WAD. Once that's done, it's going to pack it, and then now we have our level 3.2.test.wad. It's a little bit smaller than the original. The compression on this is actually better than Insomniac used in the original, so saves a little bit of space. So next thing we want to do is we're going to pack assets. So do pack assets. Again, we need the input folder, level 3/assets. Our output will be level 3. Now that's successful. That repacks it into the asset file, which is 48.wad here. And then we need to pack it all together. So packing assets actually has two stages. Then we have a global pack. So we're going to input our level folder 3. And then our output is going to be level 3 / level 3.0 test.wad. Now it's going to sit here for a minute, and once it's done, it should give you the total size of the map. Cool, total size, it's done. Again, it's a little bit smaller than the original. This is a story mode map, so there's probably things that I've not accounted for, but we'll do this on a multiplayer map here real quick. Let's show you how it works. And then, so the last thing you do is you patch the ISO. So this one has a couple more things that you want to look out for. So your input obviously is your, well, I'll tell you what, let's start with the 2 ISOs. So your input ISO you want is our UYA sandbox ISO, and then our clean ISO. This is going to be the one that obviously that you keep clean. Clean.iso. All right, and then our input folder, level 3. I believe it is, yeah, it's level 3, and then our ID is 3, and that should be it. Oh, whoops, so it didn't include ID. So there it is, it patched it, and then we are good to go. So any questions before we try this on a multiplayer map?
Man, this shit's hard. I'm going to deadlock.
Sorry, I got distracted. So yeah, every time you patch it, yeah, it re-overwrites the map. So as you're editing, you can just keep packing and then patching. And what it'll do is it brings in a clean ISO every time. So it'll clean it and then it'll reapply the patched ISO. Because what happens is you end up with maps that are larger than some of the sectors. So other maps end up getting like corrupted when you do this. So that's why you want your sandbox ISO to really be like one that you're testing a specific map for. The reason this doesn't break your real game is because it's like loaded temporarily at runtime. So as soon as you leave, like all the modified data is gone and you're back to being normal. It overrides it. So most of these were extracted at first, and then when you repack, it knows to rebuild 48.wad automatically. Yeah, you don't have to specify the names for these. Some of them were. Some of them we don't touch yet. 28.wad, that one is the sprites and icons for your weapons and stuff. I don't touch that one. 20.wad, I forget what some of these are. But really the only ones you care about are the .0.wad and the .2.wad. Those are the main ones that get overridden. You could actually delete the rest of these, and it'll be fine because it'll just use what's already in the game. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get into a multiplayer map. So just to kind of show you this real quick, we're gonna start off. We're gonna go pretty fast on this. What's cool is Windows, you can just scroll all the way up with your previous commands. So let's extract 39. There it is. Created our 39 folder. We're going to unpack. Gonna go to 39. There we go. We're gonna unpack our assets. We're just changing these 3s to 39 because everything's already been filled in. Let's unpack gameplay. Also, I forgot to mention for multiplayer maps, you don't have to do that step I mentioned with the 78 and the header. That's only for single player maps. So we'll unpack our gameplay. Let's close that. All right, we've now got our assets and our gameplay. Let's go ahead and pack them. $39. That. And now we will pack our gameplay. So instead of the test, we'll actually do .2.wad. Level 39. Sweet, that is done. And then we will pack it. All right, it's done. Now let's patch. And if everything worked out correctly, we will load into Wikisi. So before we do this, to kind of show you, I already had a version of PCS62 open. So in PCS62, you'll want to select your UYA sandbox ISO. Let's boot it up. I'll turn on turbo so we can get there. All right, local play. Now, because I was working on a map earlier, when I start this, I should load in Tiernosis. And here we are in Tiernosis. So to kind of show you. So now, let's pause that. Let's patch our ISO. So that's done, and then we'll resume. You can't overwrite the ISO while PCS62 is using it. That's why I had to pause it. Otherwise, you'll get an error that says the file is already in use. So let's quit this. We'll relaunch, and then we should be at Wikisi Isles like we normally would. Could be real fun if the map crashes on me. Hey, there we go. We're now in Wikisi. So as you can see, there's some graphical bugs because the map packing is not perfect. But it's very easy to fix these issues. Like I said, these only happen on shrubs, which is like your grass, your small things. There's a couple ways to fix that that I will cover later. So I think the next part of this is covering all of the game elements. So, any questions before we get into that? All right. So, the one about like fixing the shrubs, or so before we get into editing the gameplay file, are there any questions? The gameplay elements. Cool. So next part of this is modifying the map, moving stuff around where you want it to be. And there's a bunch of things that go into that. For that section, we don't really need this command prompt right now. We'll move PCS62 out of the way. So really, we just need our hex editor and our loose files. So this is really the part that emphasizes on it not being user-friendly, because you really have to know what you're doing. Otherwise, you can completely break a map. So there's a bunch of stuff in here to cover. Not every one of these files is edited. You don't really have to. We have some documentation on what each of these files is that we'll probably release later on. But for now, I'm just going to cover the high-level ones. So, much like the assets, there's also a folder called Moby, and this is actually the ones that are placed throughout the map. They're separated by class ID, which is this number here after the underscore. I've got a list of IDs that I can provide. It doesn't have everything, but it's a pretty good starting point for figuring out what a lot of these are, because without it, you're left guessing what each of these are. So if you go into one of these folders, I have to remember what some of these are off the top of my head as well. Let's find. I think what I'm looking for is the turbo slider. Let's start with the turbo slider. So I believe that's 107C. So this is our turbo slider. And if you go in here, what you have is moby.bin and pvar.bin. We'll cover pvars in a second. But the Moby file, you open it up, and then you got this chunk of data. So in here, each one of these, it's the same length, and each piece of it, it has the same effect. So in here, you've got 107C, which is just like the folder name. That's your class ID, which is at 228. You have the next one, which is the size. That is in a float format. So in float, it's 1. Then you have your next set. So you have your rendering distance. So I forget which one actually controls it, but if you want this to render from across the map, you would just set the sizes of these to like 7 FFF, because it only takes up half of the word. So you can set that for all these or not. It's fine. And then your next set of data, so these 3 are your position. So you have your X, your Y, and your Z. And then the next 3, even though this one has 2 zeros, this is your rotation. So you have your pitch, your yaw, and then your just Z rotation. So left and right. The rest of these couple aren't really used by multiplayer. They're usually the same, so you can leave those. This next one right here at 68, that is your P-Var Index. So this number is very important for movies like this. This tells it which index in the list for P-Vars, and that's basically additional configuration for that movie. Rule of thumb here, movies cannot share P-Var IDs. They each need to have their own unique ID. All right, so let's mess with this a little bit. So let's say I want to make the turbo slider really huge. Let's just change the size from 1 to a 2. We save that. And once we do, then we can go here and all we have to do is pack gameplay. And since this file is separate, we just pack that once. And then all we have to do is then patch the ISO, and that should edit our map. So now we resume PCS62, and let's take a look at what we've done. For the sake of speed, I've got save states, so I'm just going to reload that. Let's do deathmatch. I'm going to go ahead and save state again. We can come back to it, turn on turbo, and let's load this. All right, so I did this right. We should have a huge turbo slider if it doesn't automatically change the size. This one looks fine. I'm not quite sure which one we've edited. I have a feeling that the size is managed in other areas. All right, so let's go try the last one. Yeah, okay, so editing the size doesn't really do anything. However, what we can edit, so let's change this back to a 1, and then let's change this ID to 107F. That one I know will have some effect. So let's pack gameplay again, patch, and we'll reload. All right, so spawn, I do believe that is over here. There it is. So we've changed the turbo slider to this tank, which is a cut vehicle from multiplayer, which has super clunky controls. It only controls with one joystick, and then the other joystick controls the cannon. So moving this thing is quite interesting. So that's kind of the basis of editing some movies. Any questions?
Yes, but no. I had one, but no. Continue.
Sweet. All right, let's move on to next thing we want to cover is some crucial information about movies here. So, rule of thumb is you definitely don't want to delete one in the middle of the list. A lot of these are referenced by their index in the list and not their ID. So doing that will most certainly break your map. So you really only want to remove movies that you know won't interfere with others, or just straight up remove everything and then start fresh. So there is one that you can't delete though. You either need to have it at the beginning or somewhere in the list. This one doesn't matter where it is, but you have to have it, otherwise the multiplayer map won't work, and that's this 106A. This actually controls the multiplayer configuration. Basically, where your flag player spawn points are, and where the spawn points are in the rest of the map. So that one you don't want to mess with. You can change the P-Var data to configure spawns, but we'll cover that later. So that is one that you leave it alone. There's other movies that have special stuff too with P-Var data. We'll get to that. So let's cover some P-Var stuff. So basically, P-Vars are property variables of the MOBI. It's basically allocated storage so that the game can store state and a bunch of logic around that. A lot of these come pre-configured with data, like the turbo slider, for instance. You open this P-Var file, and obviously it's got a bunch of stuff in here. 70 or 7E0 in length. It's got a couple of configuration stuff all over. But overall, it's really just an allocated amount of space. As you can see, most of it's 0. That's where the game stores a bunch of data around it. Things like the hover ship, which is 107E here. This one actually has, if I remember right, yep. So this one's got a little bit more. This right here, this is how high you can fly, I believe, and then this one's how low you can fly. So it's got a min and a max for how high you can go, and that's pre-configured. So this data varies drastically between what MOBI you're looking at. A lot of these you really have to know what it does, or else you can royally break things. So let's go up here. So this B37, this is actually the water for the map. So if I open this, you can see it's got a bunch of stuff in here. A lot of this is dealing with overlay, underlay textures. So these two IDs here, you have your overlay and then your underlay. And then you have a bunch of variables here. This one is the color. And then you've got this one right here, I believe, this 433E, that actually controls how high or low the plane of water is. So a lot of that is it's really tribal knowledge, honestly. It's kind of, you just kind of play with it and then figure out what breaks it, what doesn't, and then go from there. So I know I've been opening a lot of these folders and it has a P-Var file in there. That doesn't actually change anything. It's really just for reference. The way you actually do change things is to go back, there's actually a P-Var folder. The P-Var folder basically lists all of these out. And then you open one, and these are the ones that you can edit, and it actually changes. So that's where you want to reference that P-Var ID from your MOBI to figure out which one you have here. So any questions on that? Cool. So P-Var IDs can't be shared. Next one. So I have it labeled here as trigger, which is wrong. I need to rename it, but they're actually called cuboids. And these are basically 3D shapes that are configured by Euler rotation. It's all like 3D math matrices, but basically this is what controls where the player spawns, among other things. But its main use in multiplayer is player spawns. There's also like the camera. It drives like where the camera, rotates when the match starts. A lot of those are configured from that other MOBI. So if we open one, there's two pieces to this. So you have this first block of 30. That is one 3D matrix. You then have this row here, which is your X, your Y, and your Z. And then you have another matrix. A lot of these will have data in them. It skews the point But that's really the three pieces to it. Just some weird knowledge here. This last bit, this 78, that's the left and right rotation for the spawn point. It's in radians, so it's not. It's either negative or positive pi. So it goes between 0 and pi, both positive and negative. That's how you control the left and right rotation. So how we configure that, or how we know which one is which, let's go back to what I mentioned, that multiplayer config. Let's open up the P-Var file. And this one's got a bunch of stuff in it. Won't cover everything here, but first and foremost, these 2 points right here, this is the blue and red base spawns for CTF. So you got 0 and 1. So if I want to change that to like 5 and 6, we can do that, and it'll change our CTF spawns. But for now, let's not. Let's just take 0, which is our spawn point. They could be reversed, but I don't believe it is. So let's do that. Let's go here. Let's go to, not P-Var. Let's go to trigger. Let's go to 0. And let's say we want to make ratchet spawn way up in the sky. So this is at 201. Let's go to 500. Let's save that, and then we'll pack our map. Patch. And then if this works right, we reload. Let's go to CTF. It is CTF. Let's start. And if it works right, it should spawn us up in the sky. And here we are. We are way in the sky. Oh, I'm getting owned. So I knew that was a lot of weirdness. Any questions on how that works? Yes and no. So when you get to this file here, this file is the source of truth. So whatever this number is, this index, that's going to be the trigger index of your spawn points. And I can't remember or not if they do this, but I think on a lot of maps it's still 0 and 1. So you might get lucky and just change 0, and that's your blue base in CTF. I know Deadlocked doesn't do that. On some of the maps, the IDs are different, but they'll always be in the same spot. However, this P-Var may not be. So this movie here, this 106A, that could be like, it could be the first one, it could be the 5th one. It just depends on what map it is, but it'll always be the same ID, at least. Any other questions? Cool. So to wrap it up with this, so a couple other things. I don't know what these are. I think these might be the indices of the camera spawning, like at the start of the map, and it spins around. I don't know that for sure. I don't know what these 2 are. I don't even think these are valid IDs. I don't know if it has that many. But you get down here, these are the normal spawn points. So everything in this list is where you can spawn on the map and its associated cuboid ID. And then as you can see, the map actually has allocated space for way more than they have. So you can actually add more if you want. Or if you just want one, you can set all these to F and just have the one, and then you spawn at the same spot every time. All right, so that covers cuboids. Next on the list is fog and death plane. So this game configures fog, and it's basically like how low you can go before Ratchet falls to his death, and that's controlled in this 0.bin file, and that is the same for every map. So these values here, that is the color. So there's the near color and the far color, I believe. Then you have these values, which are the near and far distance for the fog. And then you have this one right here, which is, this is how high the death plane is. So right now it's at 185. If I change this to 250, and we pack this, I don't know if I fixed that spawn point. I don't think I did, but that's fine. Let's patch this. We'll just go to the red team. So if we reload, we start on blue. As soon as we spawn, I'll probably die and fall to my death. There we go. Automatically spawns. Funny enough, I think I might just be right over the limit. So if I walk up here, oh, I guess not. I guess you actually have to jump. So I died. So that's how you configure that stuff. Some of these other things control other aspects of it. I don't know what they do. I think one of these is like changing it to a spherical world, which does not work on multiplayer. I've tried, which is sad. Let's undo that so we don't fall to our death all the time. All right, close that. That's the fog and death barrier. Guess I could probably edit here. Let's edit the colors. So let's say let's just make this really wacky. Let's do like a bunch of pink fog, which is magenta, so these codes are in RGB values. So basically doing 255, 0, 255, which is basically magenta. And then our near fog and our far fog, I forget how these are configured. Near is 225, then there's this. So if I set this to like 1,000, when we reload the map, I should have some pretty thick fog. I'll start speeding this up here a bit. So I got some more stuff to cover. So there we go. We now have pink fog everywhere. It didn't really affect the close fog, but it's given a bright pink tint around the map. We're in Pepto-Bismol world. All right. Any questions on that before we move on? Do all this.
I have one question. It's a little bit related to this. Can you save the death barrier for me of that so I could have it? So I could search for it in the map so I know where it's at in memory.
I'll send you the file later if that helps.
That works. Yeah, that'll help. Thank you. That's all I needed.
Yes, sir. All right. So moving on. So next part of this is actually more related to the world. So we have world instances. So there's lighting, there's tie instances, shrub instances, and the occlusion. So those are pretty key files to this. There's other parts to it that I won't cover right now, but so basically your 48 and your 52.bin, those are your ties, so your world models. Then you have 60 and 64. Those are your shrubs. We'll open those too. And then lastly, you have 148, which is, I honestly don't know how the data for this file works, but I just know it's directional lights. The data doesn't make any sense to me right now without looking at it, because it's just everywhere. But those are directional lights. And then you have 4.bin, which is your world lights. So we open up 4.bin. Multiplayer maps usually only have 2 for UYA. Single player maps can have anywhere between like 2 and 6. They configure different ones. They are 40 or 50 in length. Or 40, my bad. So we have 0, then we've got 1 at 50. And this just tells it how many there are. And it's another thing with lighting matrices. But we won't cover that here, just to kind of know where it is. So I've got all that, and then the last thing is the occlusion data, which is 144.bin. This is the configuration for telling it when to hide things, when to show them. I don't modify this because, again, it's like stuff that I don't really understand. So I copy and paste it, and it just works. So let's kind of show what that does. So the first file in these sets, so when I mentioned 48 and 52 as our ties, so 48, that's just a list of the tie model IDs. So this list here, every ID correlates to, if we go in here into assets and then tie, this has textures in it too. But if we scroll down here to the tie files, every ID that's in this list should correlate to a file in here. You want to make sure they match. So like, for instance, our first one, 2D5, we've got 2D5 right here. And then this first number is how many there are. And there's padding at the end. This isn't actually a model ID. So the next one is the instances. So this basically is an instance of where that model is in the world. It's got coordinates. It also has a matrix that scales it. They're always 50 or 60 in length. So this starts with an ID, that's how many there are, and then you get into your first instance, which again is 2D5. You've got coordinates. And one of these is actually the occlusion ID. I haven't messed with this much, so I don't know what that is off the top of my head. I believe it's this 26. You have it in 2 spots. That's the occlusion ID. So let's say we want to remove a bunch of ties. Let's just set this to 0 and see what the map looks like. So for that, again, we'll pack gameplay, and then we'll patch. Let's go ahead and reload. Let's get out of Pepto-Bismol world. So now we load. As you can tell, basically everything's gone. Now, one thing to note is that just because you've removed it doesn't mean the collision goes away. Like I mentioned earlier, the collision is baked into a single file, which makes it kind of difficult to move stuff around. So right now, the only thing we're left with is magnet walls, terrain, and shrubs, and then Mobies too. So basically the same thing applies to shrubs. You got the 60, which is the count of all the models, and then you have the instances. And that basically places everything with that. Covered occlusion and everything. Any questions? Cool. All right, now let's get into some fun stuff. Let's actually convert a map. So yeah, I don't know if I can. I don't know if it'll actually scale the. I don't know if I could scale that. I can see all the commands though. That should be larger. This over. And then if I open up a file.
I'll try Windows Plus.
Yeah, I can't really zoom in this either. What, Windows Plus in here? Well, that opened up magnifier. I don't know if we want to use that or not. Oh God. Okay, let's not. Let's not. We could probably revisit it later if we want to add in any edits. All right. So everything up until this point has led us to let's convert a map. So we already have a baseline that we want to use. So we've got Pekisi. And this is usually what I do is I always take a baseline map and then I inject other stuff into it and then I edit it afterwards. So what that looks like is, let's open up another folder here. Let's go to our UYA folder. So like I mentioned earlier, I extracted Marcadia, and then we've also got Pekisi here. So the files we actually want, there's minimum files to make the conversion work, and then there's other stuff that like makes it better. So the minimum files you need for conversion to work is your tie models, your terrain, your collision, and your occlusion for your assets. And then for your gameplay, that's going to be the tie instances, the occlusion config, and then the lighting config. Shrubs are optional. You can turn those off. And that's what I do with some of the larger maps because it cuts down on lag, and and the map doesn't really suffer from aesthetics from it in most cases. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go to our assets folder for Marcadia. And like I mentioned, let's go ahead. We'll just take the shrubs as well. Let's take the shrub, the terrain folder, and collision and occlusion. So those are the ones we want. Let's go into the asset folder for Pekisi. We're just going to delete those other ones. Delete that. And the occlusion. And then we'll paste in those other files. So those are our assets. Now let's go ahead and do the gameplay. So we'll go into the gameplay here. And like I mentioned, what you want is your ties, your shrubs, and then we want the occlusion as well, which is 144. Let's take that. Let's put it here. We'll just replace those files. And that should be the minimum thing we need to make this work. Now, obviously, there's different things you have to do to convert maps between like deadlocked and UYA. But we're just keeping it simple today with UYA. So first thing you want to do, let's pack the gameplay. Pack that new stuff in. And then let's pack our assets. It's 39, let's do that. All right. We'll pack the map since we have our assets. We'll wait for that to finish. All right. Final size 14496. I didn't mention this earlier, but there is a maximum file size for maps. For deadlocked, it's pretty consistent. I believe it actually varies in sizes because of how UYA is formatted. Don't know what that actual number is, but rule of thumb, if you're under 15 megabytes, you're fine. So let's resume that. Now we're in Bikisi. Let's go ahead and reload. And if all things go well, we should be in Marcadia, which we're not. Oh, it's because I forgot to patch the ISO. Can't forget to do that. So patch just like before. It'll warn you if it's increasing the size. That's to be expected. Let's try this again. Here we go. So as you can tell, we have, I think I might have free cam on right now. Yeah. All right. So as you can tell, we've got Marcadia loaded. But there's a lot to be desired. Number one, we have this water up here. 2, the lighting looks a little weird. 3, we fell to our death. 4, we're still spawning in the sky. But overall, we do have the map loaded. So those are the minimum things just to get stuff to load. I know that was kind of a handful of things pretty closely. Any questions? Yeah, Bikisi has kind of been the template map that I've been using. I think I might swap to Hoven actually. So one thing that we need to be careful with UA maps is that like I kind of want them all to be consistent. I'm sure many of you are aware of how difficult it is to find any type of mods for multiplayer because offsets are different for every map when they really don't need to be. Reason that I'd like to use a single map is that A, those offsets would be consistent between all custom maps, and then we'd be able to do some cool stuff with it. And B, some maps have game code loaded for stuff and others don't. So for instance, Bikisi doesn't have game code loaded for a swing shot, so I can't make a swing shot work in Bikisi normally. However, Hoven does. Hoven's got swing shots and jump pads, and among other things too, like destructible bridges. We could use that for some cool things. But those are kind of my reasons. Yep. That is one thing that's really cool about Deadlocked is they actually use the exact same code segment for every single multiplayer map. So they made it easy in the Deadlocked world. UYA is is high maintenance. We still love it though. Here's a spawn point. All right. So let's go ahead and make this this better. For one, let's make it so that we don't fall to our death. So let's go ahead and take the camera stuff from single player Marcadia and let's import it into Bakisi. So if you can notice, the single player camera has more configuration, but we don't want that because it'll tell it to do things from single player, which normally just crash the game multiplayer. So we won't copy everything. We really just want the fog up until the death barrier, which should be right here. So we just copy that. Oh, I don't want me to open that. And then we just paste it over our other file there. And then that should fix those two, so we won't fall to our death anymore. But we also just don't want to fall in general. So let's just take all of the cuboids from Marcadia and we'll paste them in Bakisi. Now we should at least spawn in a relatively normal spot. So let's do that real quick. Let's pause this. Let's just go ahead and pack our gameplay because that's all we need for this part. Let's patch. Now when we reload, we should spawn in a normal spawn point. What just happened? Where am I? Oh, it spawned us in the palace. That's not what we want. Let's actually go back to the real part of the map. Oh, of course, I fell in the water. Hey, but we spawned in the right spot. My camera's messed up because I used free cam. But here we are with the map. We don't have any water, but for the most part we have map we can walk around and stuff. So next part, let's fix the lighting and the sky. As you can tell, we still actually have the Bakisi Isles sky. So for that, it's another simple gauntlet of file replacement. So let's go into our assets, and we really just have to copy sky.bin. This can be exported into its own textures and stuff, but normally I just don't do that because it's easy to just replace the file. All right, so there's our sky. The next thing we want is our lighting. So let's go back into gameplay. And that was that 4.bin file, like I mentioned. This one actually has 3, so we'll copy all of that, put it in here, let's paste it. So that was that one. So the other part of the lighting, like I mentioned earlier, was this 148.bin file. You can tell Marcadia has a ton more lighting than Bakisi, so we'll see if this actually works. I can just copy and replace this file. Cool. So let's do that. Let's pack our assets. Let's pack our gameplay. We'll pack the map. Pause the emulator. Yep, we're still within our limits, so let's patch that. And let's try this again. Yep, so now you can see we've got the Marcadia sky and the lighting's been fixed. It looks a lot more like actual Marcadia now. walk through. We've got other stuff here. But yep, the map's really starting to shape up. Cool. That should be really it. There's other advanced things to do that we won't cover in this workshop, but they should be the basics. So another thing that you really want to look out for is that PCSX2 is very forgiving with certain things. What I mean is that it'll throw errors, but the game will continue running. So what I do is I always have this program log open in PCSX2. So earlier, I got a couple of these errors right here. Like there's like load errors, there's TLB miss. These are the most common ones. If you see any of this, you'll want to stop and figure out what changed to cause that, because any red at all in the console like this will freeze a PS2. So the map will not be usable on a PS2. This dev9 message, it's red, but you can ignore it. It's not actually a problem. Any of this other red though, that is stuff to worry about. Any questions on that? Yeah, it's a cheat file. Troy made it. It's not perfect. I believe that actually was what caused some of my errors before. So if you notice, if I go into free cam, I move around. Once I'm in free cam, if I die and do it again, then I'll start getting errors, and that's when you saw like I just kept like wrenching like this, even though like I wasn't doing anything. A lot of this is, this is years of trial and error. What's good is like the gameplay stuff. That was basically like identical to, they didn't change it on PS3. So a lot of the knowledge that I learned from doing custom maps on PS3 translated perfectly to doing PS2. The only difference is the PS3 gameplay stuff is in Big Indian, the PS2 is in Little Indian. And to put it simply, it's just the byte order, depending on stuff. The asset stuff is drastically different though. That took a lot of figuring out. Good thing is with the debug symbols that got released from Deadlocked, a lot of those translate perfectly to UYA. So a lot of the instance format and all that stuff is identical between Deadlocked and UYA. So that made determining that pretty simple, figuring out where stuff was. So future topics, we've got converting textures between Deadlocked and UYA format. We've got converting textures from bitmap to PIF. PIF is basically the PS2 texture format that the Ratchet games use. There's different inside the PIF format. There's different variants. We'll cover that. There's converting the collision between Deadlocked and UYA. The Moby instances are different between Deadlocked and UYA. And the world instances are different. But those are future topics for a different workshop. As you can tell, I spawned in the the room there for a bit. And I think it just like bugged out and I can't even respawn anymore. But that just about covers this first workshop. If you guys want to let me know if you'd be interested in future series, let me know. Or if you have any questions after we're done here that you haven't thought of, you can shoot those my way. But yeah, anything before we break?